Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Well, Donald Trump is the President-elect of the United States. Among many other things, this means he will take charge of United States foreign policy. Unlike Hillary Clinton's star-studded campaign team, analysts seem to have a few clues about who is advising Trump on foreign policy. When Trump unveiled little-known members of his foreign policy team early this year, many prominent Republicans and supporters of the real estate billionaire appeared baffled, questioning Trump's readiness to lead the country in a changing and volatile world. So what will Trump's foreign policy be like? And more importantly, what will his foreign policy towards India be? That's what we're going to discuss on this edition of The Big Picture. Joining me on the program today are Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary. Also with me on the program, Professor S.D. Muni, Foreign Affairs expert, Pramit Chaudhuri, consulting editor of the Hindustan Times, and Tridivesh Singh, Maini, Senior Research Associate, Jindal School of International Studies. Ambassador, I'd like to start with you, of course. Yesterday, we were all coming to terms with what really happened in the United States, but that is history. Now, let's look forward, because the American public have given Trump the mandate, and they have said, you need to lead us for the next 4 years at least. But let's talk about his foreign policy and, more importantly, what it means for India.
Well, this is a big agenda because this will keep us busy at least for the next 4 years. And if Trump has said that he may repeat this performance even for 8 years, so we'll have to keep that in mind, that Trump and his people are extremely sharp, extremely intelligent. They know all the latest technologies. They were able to connect directly to those people who were totally missed out by the mainstream media and by the opinion pollsters. Therefore, we have to keep in mind that he is representing a certain viewpoint of a majority of Americans, which has been normally left out, and he will have to prepare the ground. And firstly, priority should be on the domestic policies.
Indeed. Because
he has talked about raising the infrastructure in America as the best in the world and doubling the economy. So therefore, these are the first priorities. But then simultaneously will come that his anger against the regional trade arrangements and other arrangements which are being tied down, like the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership for Pacific and Asian countries. So therefore, India should feel a little bit relaxed that if the Trans-Pacific Partnership is put in the cold storage, then India and China were out of that negotiation, and their tariff walls would have been faced by the Indian exporters. So we have to now work out in consultation with the Asian countries and with the United States as to what kind of an arrangement we can work out, whether bilaterally or whether in the context of the WTO negotiations. So this is a new ball game which we have to keep in mind. Secondly, Trump has been talking about the American jobs which have been stolen by many countries, and he has named China and many other countries.
India,
and somewhere in
etc.
India also comes in.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that India is one of the main countries in his mind. Of course, for us, the H-1B visa holders or the IT area where we have made a particular success, we are quite concerned on that score. But the point is that this is also a weakness of the Indian IT companies, that they are connected directly to the most advanced countries in the world, but not connected so much within their own country. So if somehow we can work out together, let's say infrastructure development in both USA and what we call ourselves skill development, smart city development, etc., it might help both countries.
Indeed.
So
I think technology also is a sector that both countries can concentrate on. Professor Muni, do you think that there are more positives really for India and US to take forward along with President Trump, or do you think that India really needs to be worried right now?
I think India needs to be cautiously and waiting.
Okay.
Rather than being worried, because my feeling is that the candidate Trump will not be the President Trump. He would be very different from what it is. Secondly, as Mr. Shashank said rightly, his main agenda was domestic. And that is where he says America first. So obviously, anything which caters to American interest in his perception or the perception of his team would be carried out. And this is where the question of visas, the immigrants is a major problem. The trade is another major problem. but he hasn't been very clear on foreign policy issues, except perhaps one indication that he wants America more inward looking, and an America inward looking which can also coexist with Russia, which is a major part of the foreign policy. He hasn't been very clear on China, except on the trade issues. He talked about the Islamic terrorism, and he still says he would be able to fight it. But mind it, he changed his statements on the Muslims and whether that would be permitted or how they would come. So I think in India there is a tendency in some sections to jump on some of these clues, which I think are still fragile. It would almost take 1 year for Trump to shape up his foreign policy. He's taking over in January, so another 2 months to go. Then easily another 8 to 10 months to go to see what directions it takes.
Would you say the first 100 days would be extremely crucial? We can wait and we can judge or get an assessment in the first 100 days maybe?
My feeling is 100 days in the American context would be too short to find out on foreign policy.
Indeed.
On domestic policy, yes, perhaps. But on foreign policy, one or two other aspects which he has said, like nuclearizing Korea, or he said he will have no problem with even Japan goes nuclear, which seriously drastically changes balance in Asia Pacific where we are interested. And that's where he said that he would even strengthen American position in the Indo-Pacific region, including South China Sea. So there are some straws, but I would, frankly speaking, say be cautious, wait and watch, assess his actions, because it's a different president. Don't take whatever the candidate Trump said very seriously and project long-term interest on that basis.
You know, two very interesting things there being brought up by Professor Muni, Pramit, is the fact that don't, take President Trump to be the candidate Trump. And we saw that yesterday as well in his victory speech. He was very gracious when he came out and he thanked Hillary Clinton. He said, we should appreciate all the work that she's done. The question really is, we don't know too much about his foreign policy. He's not spoken about it. He's been criticized about it as well right through the campaign.
Right.
And that's something that Professor Muni has spoken about too. What will be interesting to see is who his Secretary of State will be. There are a couple of names doing the rounds, but do you think that he is really going to take a final call on that Secretary of State, and that person will then decide what foreign policy is?
Well, he will have an entire national security foreign policy team. The Secretary of State, Newt Gingrich, is the name that has been going around the most. On the Pentagon, or his national security advisor, we have the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Michael Flynn. We have Senator Jeff Sessions. We have his foreign policy advisor during the campaign was a man called Carter Page, a businessman who is very close to Russia, or very supportive of Russia. We have a number of other people that he's brought around with him and said his foreign policy team consists of. Yes, I think these people will be the crucial elements. And below that, you will have a whole set of undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, who will ultimately implement the actual policy on the ground. I would argue that we're seeing at present roughly 3 types of advisors congregating around him. And they're a remarkably small number, given like Clinton had almost 700 foreign policy, national security people on her team. Trump seems to have barely about 20. But one, we have a group who are violently concerned about Islamic terror, especially the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Michael Flynn, who fought them in Afghanistan and Iraq, and left the DIA partly because he felt that Obama was underplaying the threat from Al-Qaeda. Has been one of his most important advisors. We have Walid Fares, a very eccentric Christian Arab who takes a very strong anti-Muslim position, especially about Muslim activity inside the United States as much as anywhere else. We have a few other people like that. Then we have a group of anti-China people. Now, what is interesting about them, people like James Navarro and Alexander Gray and so on, is that their argument is that the original Obama and, if you wish, Republican position was the pivot to Asia would consist of the TPP. It's very important to realize that TPP was ultimately not about trade. America got almost nothing out of TPP economically. It was all about trying to develop a strategic, an economic strategic alternative to the RCEP and so on that China was trying to push. By abandoning the TPP, they're in fact saying that the economic containment of China using a multilateral trade agenda is over. But what is their other response? Their response is ultra-militarization. So they have spoken in their writings and their speeches. They have said the U.S. Navy, down to 250 ships now, must go back up to 350. Now, what is interesting is that their argument is the strengthening of a Chinese, an iron circle around China on the military side. But this runs counter to what Trump has said, at least on the campaign trail, which is that why should we bother to have allies like Japan and Korea and have to pay for theirs defense? Let them go nuclear. Let them do their own thing. My sense, therefore, is that if he's going to merge these policies, he will basically say, tell Japan and Korea, I will militarize to hold back China, but you are going to have to put up a lot more money. And I think we're going to see a man pushing very hard to support the remilitarization of Japan, which is something that is in convergence with India. Finally, the third group, which is the most hopeful group for India, is that people like Stephen Hadley, potentially John Huntsman and others who are traditional Republican, members of the Republican establishment, who have not come out against Trump or at least signed any of these petitions saying that Trump must leave or give up office. These people are still within the Trump group, and these are ex-Bush, even ex-Clinton in some cases, Republicans, but have worked in and they are part of classic American mainstream. And they are particularly good for us because they're very old friends of India. They are people who helped us in the nuclear deal, who have been part of the entire building of the relationship, virtually going back to Bill Clinton's years. This third team is the group that the Indian side is hoping will be embedded in key positions within the administration and provide a sort of continuity. Now, the interesting that's developing, however, is Trump is finding it very difficult to fill in the positions in his government.
Yes.
There was a piece in the Daily Beast this morning that said just to get the 20 people for the Homeland Security transition team, he can't find them. There are even among the Republicans, they're refusing to join him. They're saying, we're not prepared to join you. We do not think that you're a commander-in-chief. You do not have the right to, we don't have the credentials to be the man who can lead us on security. That would seem to indicate that he will have no choice but to turn more and more to the mainstream Republicans and forgive and forget the battles in the campaign, just to fill in the several hundred positions that he's got to do in the intelligence, Pentagon, and so on in the U.S. system. Again, which will be something, a source of relief, I think, to the international system.
Indeed. Right through the campaign trail, Trump has been at odds with, with most of the Republican foreign policy establishment, and that has come out in the media as well, and very clearly and very strongly. Tridivesh, I'd like to bring you in, of course, because there's one more thing that, Trump has been speaking about all through his campaigning and right through the last 1.5 years or so. He's been talking about how he's going to bring down corporate tax from 35% to 15%. Now, that too could have potential impact here in India.
Yeah, I think especially the information technology companies are worried about this, and there's genuine concern. But I think I would go generally with what Professor Muni said. I think at this point of time, we need to be a bit cautious. And once he's in power, I think even in his economic policies, there will be some recalibrations. So I think if you talk about reduction, then obviously he has to, basically he has a tough job to reconcile, on the one hand his campaign promises, and on the other when he's in office, as president, the constraints which he faces. So I think not only in the context of taxation, but even on other security issues, I think that is going to be his biggest challenge, which I think any, generally you can say any maverick faces. And I think being an outsider to the system, you obviously, all outsiders globally, if you look at the approach, once they are during the election campaigns, it's quite similar. But once you're inside the system, you actually do change. And even as Mr. Chaudhuri was saying about, even if you look at his team, at the end of the day, all the insiders and all the people who from the Beltway who he criticized, he has to ultimately have some of them in his team. So I think a lot will change once he actually takes over. So that's how I would.
Someone else has been watching everything that's happening in the United States very cautiously. Pakistani media today was talking about how Trump is going to be a problem for Pakistan, because in the past as well, he has criticized Pakistan, almost called Pakistan a terrorist state. So does Pakistan have cause for concern, Ambassador, and that indirectly will help India too?
Well, Pakistan should have cause for concern, no doubt. Trump has not only talked about Pakistan being one of the difficult states to handle, he has also said that India would be a key country to take care of Pakistan. So therefore, there are likely to be shifts in the positions of the United States and the kind of cynical policies which have been followed all this time, that on one hand criticizing Pakistan, on the other hand giving them huge amounts of money and armament, etc., from the American inventory, in order to bolster the military in Pakistan on the ground that they cannot just afford to have 200 million people of Pakistan turning into anti-American people. Already there are such anti-American feelings in Pakistan that the more money they pour in Pakistan, the more anti-American feelings are aroused among the ordinary Pakistani people. And we have seen in the past how Pakistanis have attacked the American agents there, how they have tried to kill some of them in the past. So some of these things will be kept in mind by the American establishment. I am quite sure that they have that. But would they be able to change it completely? Because till they clear their position on Afghanistan, number one, and secondly on the Middle East, where they are clearly saying that this Al-Qaeda and Daesh, etc., they are creation of the American partnership with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all the other countries in the Middle East. And he would like to change it. And he does not see that Russia should be treated as an enemy when Russia is killing the enemies of the United States. So we will have to see how it all works out, because in the American calculations, establishment calculations, Russia still remains the main adversary.
Indeed. We'll talk about Russia in just a bit, but before that, I want to ask Professor Muni something. You know, Professor Muni, a lot of parallels have been drawn between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump. We've seen that happening as well, and we saw Donald Trump himself, you know, come out and, you know, praise Prime Minister Modi during his campaign speeches. So do you see some kind of camaraderie there? Do you see, you know, because the Prime Minister has worked extra hard over the last 2.5 years to build a relationship with President Barack Obama. Is that going to continue now with Trump?
Well, I think so, because first thing which I want to underline is that, you know, there is a broad consensus in the US foreign policy establishment on India, and bipartisan consensus. In fact, Republicans and Democrats are not seriously divided so far as India is concerned. And you would recall the kind of policies which Bush pursued. Obama, for the first year, gave indications that he might change, he may be more pally with the Chinese, and suddenly you found that line being given up. So I am quite confident that whether it is a question of China, Pakistan, Asia Pacific, India is by and large a preferred country in the US at this stage, both economically and strategically. And I think Mr. Modi has will have to change a bit of his style from coming from Barack to Don, because you know he prefers to have a direct rapport and calling him by first name. Let us see how he switches it on. But basically, the electoral dynamics of both these leaders has many similarities.
Yes.
And that is one reason where they strike the chord. And Trump went almost out of the way to cultivate Hindu Indo-Americans,
Yes.
which was, I mean, being very surprising in some sense. He even went to the extent of saying "Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar," which is actually a slogan of Mr. Modi, which he mouthed again. So yes, I think I see a lot of scope for the two to hit a rapport and perhaps work together, not only because of personalities, yes, plus because of the strategic base in which America would find India.
Indeed. You know, Pramit, let's broaden the spectrum a little bit and talk about foreign policy on the whole. Now, Europe has been extremely concerned and worried about this Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin axis.
Yeah.
Now, is there cause for concern for Europe there? Do you believe that this axis is going to really happen? And is that the new axis that's going to take the world forward?
Look, there's not going to be a US-Russia alliance, and there's not going to be, I think, any serious attempt by Russia or the US to wreck or undermine NATO in any serious way, despite what Trump has said on the campaign trail. But what I think has been understood by Trump's team is that Vladimir Putin, having had, if you wish, already absorbed the eastern Ukraine and Crimea, is not really interested in further encroaching upon any other parts of Europe. He has accomplished what he felt he needed to do politically and strategically. And as you've mentioned, the view is that if Putin is prepared to attack the Islamic State, then that is by far the #1 danger facing the United States, at least, and Russia is not an issue. Second, Europe itself is very divided on this issue. Many countries like Hungary and so on in the Balkans and Eastern Europe have basically said that we might as well come to terms with the fact that Crimea is gone, and at some point later maybe we can do something. But right now it makes no sense to do so. And third, the other group is those who were worried about China, and this is one of these countries is India, argues that all you're doing by isolating Putin from his biggest market, which has been Europe, he's been driven into the arms of China, and to the point where Russia is now completely subservient to China in almost every way. When Russian troops are exercising in Pakistan, the kind of military technology that is now being passed off by Russia to China at their request are in fact undermining the relationship between India and Russia. So the Europeans, while they're nervous, I think they've understood that they've now reached the limits to what they can do to damage Vladimir Putin. And there's no chance that he's going to give up Crimea on the basis of anything right now. So I have a suspicion that we will see that Trump will find some degree of accommodation from Europe, and eventually making the argument that the Islamic State is the primary threat, come to terms with Putin. Interestingly, polls have indicated with Americans that if, when asked, yes, Russia is a threat, they agree, most of them, but they say that if Russia and America were to join against the Islamic State, would you support this? 80% of Americans say yes. Trump, whatever else he may be, is actually in sync with what the American public believes, even if Washington's establishment is still very unhappy with this.
Now, Tridivesh, is that what's going to happen in the future as well? Because everyone's saying that, Trump somehow seems to be far more connected with the general public in the United States, and he's going to take that sentiment going forward.
I think, as I said, there will be elements of that. He cannot ignore that. And the real challenge is going to be that, balancing what he actually needs to do as President of the United States of America and some of the promises which he has made. But I think as far as, for example, if you look at the context of Russia, and if the US-Russia relationship were to witness an improvement, I think that creates a lot of options for other countries as well. In fact, for India, for example, it would be very good. I think that's a welcome development. And in the context of other, at the end of the day, one also has to remember that whatever it is, he is a businessman also. So he does bring some amount of pragmatism to the table. So I think seeing all these things, I think he does have a lot of challenges, but if he can show a certain amount of pragmatism, that creates new opportunities as well, rather than looking at all these things as obstacles and challenges.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Professor Muni, you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to seek reaction of the co-panelists. If he says America first, and if he reduces American engagement with the world, what are its implications? And this is where I think both US relationship with Russia on the one hand and China on the other hand is very, very critical. Because if he really decides to reduce the engagement, which will definitely leave much more scope for the Chinese and the Russians to play the role at the global level. And that's a possibility which I think India has to very carefully watch and guard off.
That's a very interesting observation. Ambassador, would you like to respond to that? I've got 2 minutes on the program. I'll get final reactions from all of you, starting with you, Ambassador.
I will go back to the earlier arguments which were being used, that his team perhaps would like Japan and Korea and other European partners to put in more money and to strengthen their own defenses. Americans will, of course, they would like to increase their military strength. Now the point is, where will this money come from? And that he would insist that everybody should share in that, because he wants to make America first in the world, but also not only on economic side, but also on defense and strategic side. So that will remain the main agenda, and I think then there will be subsections within that. And we'll have to keep that in mind, how India can take care of its interests and make sure that China does not get into the old position of G2. And we find that Indo-Pacific does not mean that India forgives all its own priorities and make them subservient to any global agenda being pursued by the Americans.
You know, if America looks at America first, what happens to Syria, what happens to West Asia, and what happens to ISIL and the whole situation
as
there?
Professor Muni said, Trump, if you look at almost 3 decades as an analysis of 3 decades of what he has said in private or public about foreign policy, he's very much a 19th century isolationist. He believes that America's allies, as he likes to say, it's been screwed by its own allies because they refuse to pay up for the defense that America provides them. So his form of isolationism is quite extreme. And Professor Muni is completely right. I think more than Russia, though, the country that would massively expand its sphere of influence in a purely isolationist situation would be China.
Indeed.
And under Obama, even his bouts of isolationism is one of the reasons why China controls half of the South China Sea today. The question for me is that if you look, however, at Obama's foreign policy team, they argue not so much for isolationism, but a new form of international engagement in which America's commitments and America's burden is reduced. And the question for me is which of these two positions, the president's instincts or the advice of his foreign policy team, will actually become actual American foreign policy on the ground is a big question. My sense would be normally it's the team that wins in the long run.
Indeed, it is the team that wins, but we'll have to wait and see because Trump is a different kind of a president as well, the first of his kind really in the United States. Final comments from you, Tridivesh, and then I'll close the show.
I think I would, at the end, I think it's quite early to judge us yet. We have to give some time. But there are going to be some challenges in terms of, balancing out what he has spelled out so far with, the ground realities. So I think that is going to be a major challenge, and hopefully his team will prevail on him. Yeah.
Indeed. All right. We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shashank, Professor S.D. Muni, Pramit, Chaudhuri, Tridivesh, Singh, Maini. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into picture for us on this edition of The Big Picture. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching.